When we think of the history of the mass media, we think of great inventors and scientists, men like Johann Gutenberg, who invented the printing press, Louis Daguerre, who invented photography, Thomas Edison, who invented the phonograph and talking motion pictures. But the man who was the greatest influence on the mass media in the 20th century was not a scientist or an inventor. He was a crooner. His name was Bing Crosby.
Where the blue of the night meets the gold of the day, someone saw me.
People cannot believe today the degree to which between 1934 and 1954 Crosby utterly dominated in entertainment.
Great. That's him, all right.
Nobody had the kind of impact on radio or television that Crosby had. And nobody had as many hit records. I mean, Sinatra and Elvis don't come close.
Oh, bells of St. Mary, we always will love you.
Bing Crosby inaugurated and began a recording revolution. Bing Crosby was responsible for the birth of the tape recorder in America.
If you sail, sailing over the sea,
and will you wait for me?
take my tip, they're all moto hip in Italy.
Well, I read the chance.
He is certainly a jazz singer. Every musician that I've ever talked to said that they would rather work with him than anybody. He had an absolutely perfect sense of rhythm.
Be assisted by Mr. Buddy Cole here at the piano. If you don't mind, I'll sort of, I'll sing this from a leaning posture. All that dancing back there, that's a little rugged for an old gaffer like me.
It had to be you. Yes, it had to be you. I wandered around and I finally found somebody who could make me be true, could make me feel blue, and even be glad just to be sad, thinking of you. Some others I've seen might never be me, might never be cross or try to be bored, but they wouldn't do, for nobody else gives me that thrill. You got your faults, but I love you still. It had to be you, had to be you, wonderful you. Yes, it had to be you. It had to be you. I wandered around, then I finally found somebody who could make me be true, could make me feel blue, and even be glad just to be sad, thinking of you. Some others I've seen might never be me, might never be cross or try to be boss, but they ain't gonna do, for nobody else gives me that thrill. You've got your faults, but I loved you still. It had to be you, had to be you, wonderful you.
The things things he did had an effect on just about every singer that followed him. There wasn't one singer that you can mention, say from the 40s or the 50s, that wasn't influenced by Crosby. Sinatra said on several occasions, Bing was his daddy. Bing was the father of his career.
Did you ever? What a swell party. Swell party. Swelling it, elegant party. This is.
The Bing Crosby story starts in the northwest of the United States. In 1906, when Bing was 3, his family moved to the mining and timber town of Spokane. The family house in Spokane is still there. There were 7 children. Their mother, Catherine's parents, had emigrated from Ireland.
I know that Dad grew up in an incredibly musical house, kind of that staunch Catholic mother, and then the sort of happy-go-lucky father who was always playing records and playing the mandolin and not necessarily bringing home a check.
But Father Harry, a bookkeeper in a local brewery, did bring home one of the first record players in Spokane. And young Harry, as he was christened, grew up to the sound of the great stand-up entertainer and singer Al Jolson and imitated him.
You made me fly for, I didn't want to tell you, I didn't want to tell you. Some love from you, that's true, you know what you did, yes I do.
By the time young Harry went to Gonzaga High School across the road, he was already called Bing, a name given him by a playmate after a big-eared character in a comic feature in the Bingville Bugle, the local paper. Gonzaga is an educational institution run then and now by Jesuit fathers. The Jesuits encouraged manliness, and Bing distinguished himself in sports, basketball and boxing, football and swimming. And he was starting to develop communication skills.
You know, Bing is the only major figure in the history of American popular music who had a classical education. He's the only one. He had 4 years at Gonzaga. He was a debating champ, and his best subjects were elocution, and he was always delivering speeches, and he cared about words and language.
Hey, Lonnie, heavenly flower, tropic skies are jealous as they are. Or would you like to swing on a star, carry moonbeams home in a jar, and be better off than you are? Or would you rather be a mule? While I give to you, and you give to me true love, true love. So on and on it'll always be true love, true.
Over the years, Bing donated more than $1 million to Gonzaga. In the library there, all his gold records are on display, together with the first acting Oscar for a singer. It was for his portrayal of the Irish priest Father O'Malley in Going My Way. He did decide to take control of his life very early on. Show business was beginning to call. Now at Gonzaga University to study law, he bought a drum kit and joined a local group, the Musical Ladies. Bing soon reckoned he could make more money in a band than in a lawyer's office. He teamed up with the pianist Al Rinker. They dropped out of college and headed for the bright lights in an old Model T Ford.
We ain't got a barrel of mama money. Maybe we're ragged and plump on money. We'll travel along, singing a song, side by side. Don't know what's coming to mama tomorrow. Maybe it's trouble and sorrow. We'll travel along, sharing our load, side by side.
Through all kinds of weather, what if the sky should fall? As long as we're together, it doesn't matter at all.
When they've all had their quarrels and parted, we'll be the same as we started. Just travel along. this.
Bing enjoyed the money he was now earning and his liberation from the Jesuits and provincial life. He enthusiastically joined the Jazz Age and quickly earned a reputation for overindulgence and unreliability.
He was drinking and falling asleep under tables and literally being discovered the next morning, you know, under tables in nightclubs because they couldn't find him. And when he missed gig after gig with Whiteman was once asked by a reporter, was Bing hard to difficult to work with? And Whiteman said, well, he wasn't difficult to work with, but sometimes he was difficult to find.
The summer of 1929 saw Whiteman's musicians kicking their heels in Los Angeles waiting to start filming The King of Jazz. To keep them happy, Whiteman helped all his boys to buy cars. Returning from a night on the town, Bing crashed his and ended up in court charged with drink driving during Prohibition. He got 30 days, but Whiteman got him out on day release to appear in the pioneering Technicolor musical.
Bad luck, look at the good luck and the bad luck there. I never saw blue.
July 3rd, 1937.
Where the turf meets the surf, down at old Del Mar. Take a plane, take a train, take a car. There's a smile on every face, and a winner in each race. Where the turf meets the surf at Del Mar.
Among Bing's major investments over the years were horses, livestock, real estate, a baseball team, orange juice, a tequila factory, movies, prize fighters, and a fish packing concern. But he still made time for his favorite recreation.
I went to see a doctor 'cause I was feeling ill. He told me to take a little red tea and a little white pill.
The only thing that bothered Bob was that Bing was always 2 strokes better than he. He had a 2 handicap and Bob had a 4 handicap.
Crosby's friendship with Hope survived their sporting rivalry, and Bob and his wife were guests of Bing and Dixie at Del Mar Racetrack.
They always had a big celebration the last day of the races. And during this show, Bob and Bing got up and did this routine that they had done at the Capitol a few years before. And that's where the idea for the road pictures began, because somebody from Paramount Studios was there, and when he saw them, he said, we've got to do something with these 2 guys. Bob was supposed to be the comedian, and Bing was supposed to be the love interest. And it got mixed up a few times.
What are you doing? Don't talk. Don't do anything. What are you talking about? Hinge. What? Oh, hiya. Listen, Doc. Oh, no! No! Don't! Oh, no! Look out there!
Bob and Bing had a great rivalry, and I think that was part of the joy of those road pictures. They spent a lot of time trying to top each other.
We're off on the road to Morocco. This taxi is tough on the spine. Where we're going, why we're going, how can we be sure? I'll lay you 8 to 5 that we meet Dorothy Lamour.
They enjoyed each other so much, and I think they communicated that to the audiences very quickly, and still do.
Look! No hands! Watch out! No teeth! Please, my sponsor.
Bing was a fine actor, and in the road pictures, of course, he was the villain up to some points, but because of the things he'd do to Bob.
As Martin Scorsese once pointed out, throughout the road movies, all he's trying to do is betray Bob Hope and get him killed or, sold him to slavery. But we love him anyway because we always see the irony behind it and the smile that's there, and because we know that ultimately Bing's warmth covers everything else.
Jap planes without warning bring war to America. Our great Pacific outpost in the Hawaiian Islands is ruthlessly bombed.
In December 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor and America came into the war. That Christmas on his craft radio show, Bing sang a song by Irving Berlin, a song of peace and yearning for absent friends. It's been described as one of the definitive sounds of the 20th century.
I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know, where the treetops glisten and children listen to hear sleigh bells in the snow. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas with every Christmas card I write. May your days be merry and bright, and may all your Christmases be white. Kiss me once, then kiss me twice, then kiss me once again. It's been a long, long time.
If my generation will bear with me for a moment, I'd like to say a few words to the boys and the girls of high school age. The war is won, but we've got a lot of jobs to do yet, big jobs, jobs that'll take a lot of brains. I'm saying this because that old high school bell is going to be clanging soon, and it clangs for you.
Or just how empty they all seemed without you. So kiss me once, then kiss me twice, then kiss me once again. It's been a long, long time.
In 1946, he really reinvents the whole industry.
For years, Bing's packed life had to make space for the weekly live broadcast of the Kraft Music Hall for NBC. He was determined to record the show.
NBC would not let him do that. They had rules against recording live radio, variety, and music programs.
So Bing found a different sponsor and moved to a new radio station.
This is Ken Carpenter welcoming you to Philco Radio Time, produced and transcribed in Hollywood with John Scott.
ABC was a station that was so low rent that no major star would appear on it. Everything was NBC and CBS, so overnight, A, he makes ABC into a third network, a major contender. B, every other star, they all wanted to pre-record. It made life so much easier. They all went over there. Jack Benny, instantly. Eddie Cantor, every one of them. Hey, if Bing can do it, we're going to do it. That virtually ended live radio.
And it was the start of a new technology Bing was to pioneer. The quality of the shellac discs used to record the programs was poor, and Bing wanted something better. The Germans had invented the tape recorder in the 1930s, and an American serviceman, Jack Mullin, brought just 2 back at the end of the war. Bing heard about them and was the first to sign up Mullin.
And this is the machine, one of the pair of 2 that I had, and I'm going to let you hear the kind of thing that it was capable of doing. The little piece of tape that I'm going to play on here was actually recorded in 1947 when I went to work for Bing Crosby to do his radio show, and it still sounds as good as it ever did.
Hey, Jerry, what are we sweeping up the studio for?
Bing Crosby is coming back on the air tonight.
Hiya, fellas.
Well, Bing, hello.
Where the blue of the night.
Through Crosby Enterprises, Bing invested $50,000, enabling the Ampex company to produce the first American tape recorder.
This was the end product. This is the first model of the Ampex 200, the most beautiful tape recorder ever made.
The Ampex tape recorder was immediately adopted by all of the radio networks and all of the major recording studios. Many people thought this kind of technology, being able to edit a performance, being able to record one thing on top of another, what is known as dubbing or overdubbing, was a good idea.
To the legendary guitarist Les Paul, the tape recorder was a prayer answered.
Such was Bing's reputation that everyone wanted to work with him.
The first time I ever met Bing, the phone rang, and it was Bing Crosby, and he said, "Hey, Les, would you like to make a record with me?" Well, I was over there about 12 hours before he got there, and we made that recording in about 15, 20 minutes. The record was called It's Been a Long, Long Time. We took one take. Bing says, "You know your part?" I says, "I know it frontwards and backwards." And so he says, "Okay, Junior's ready, let's go." And the light went on, and we did it. He said, "That's a take." And he says, "Well, what do you think of it?" And I said, "Well, I could have done better." He says, "It sounded good to me." See you later. And that's it. That's Bing. Well, Bing made this recording, and I played the guitar with him. And in 2 weeks, it was #1 all over the world, including London, England. And on the strength of that record, I got a job immediately in Needles, California, in the middle of the Mojave Desert, playing for 4 bartenders and an Indian. Bing comes over to the backyard, and he says, "Hey, Les, I got something for you." And he gave me one of their first tape machines so I could play with it. He says, "I think you're going to like this thing." I must have had it 2 hours when I called Mary, and she was doing the laundry. And I says, "I've discovered a way
to mingle with blackbirds. I never saw bluebirds doing things backwards. Never knew good luck ever could perch with care. Now I overheard those birdies talking today, and I know just why they're acting this way."
Maybe I better pick up the thread of the story.
Would you leave me?
Okay. First the bluebird said, "We've got to have sunny weather." So the bluebirds and the blackbirds got together. Then the blackbird said, "Oh, we're birds of a different feather." So the bluebirds and the blackbirds got together.
I think Bing's was the first voice with hormones. It had sex appeal, and it paid attention to the lyrics. Now, he started singing in the pre-microphone days, and which meant when he started out, he was singing really in the tenor register to be heard over the band. But when the microphone came in, Crosby decided to use the technological aid that brought, so he could bring the keys down, get into the nuances of a song, and sing softly where the lyric demanded it. What Crosby was perfecting was the first really interesting microphone voice.
Bing was the first one who realized that the microphone was an instrument. You could play that instrument like you would play a piano or a violin.
Oh, please, lend your little ear to my pleas. Lend a ray of cheer to my pleas. Tell me that you love me too. Please, let me hold you tight in my arms. I could find delight in your charms every night, my whole life through. Your eyes reveal that you have the soul of an angel white as snow. How long must I play the role of a gloomy Romeo? Please, say you're not intending to tease. Speed that happy ending and please Tell me that you love me too.
Here is the moment you have been waiting for. The delayed appearance of that sensational baritone, Bing Crosby.
In 1931, Bing got his own coast-to-coast radio show, his intimate, crooning baritone giving comfort to listeners at home as the Great Depression gripped the country outside.
Just one more chance.
I've learned the meaning of repentance. Now you're the jury at my trial. I know that I should serve my sentence. Still I'm hoping all the while you'll give me just one more word. I said that I was glad to start out, but now I'm back to cry my heart out for just one more chance.
The golden timbre of Bing's voice appealed immediately to his radio audience. But equally important was his jazz phrasing and scat, inspired by his friend Louis Armstrong. One band leader described me as the first hip white man.
There's a Max Sennett short where he sings Just One More Chance, and the last chorus of that is absolutely intuitive. He was singing across the beat, behind the beat, and he was changing lyrics.
Oh, just one more night. Taste those kisses that enchant me. I would want no others if you'd but grant me. Would you grant me one more opportunity? I've learned the meaning of repentance. Now you're the jury at my trial. Figure I ought to serve some sentence, but I'm hoping all the while you'll give me just one more word. I said that I was glad to start out. Here I am, back to cry my heart out for just one more chance.
That little pop at the end there, there's a little bit of vaudeville creeping in there, which I think he did for fun. But that's how Crosby was sounding in 1931, and nobody else, but nobody, was singing anywhere like that at that time.
Bing's sense of vaudeville was put to good use at the start of his film career in a number of shorts for Max Sennett.
Oh, sweetheart, last we fooled your dad. Oh, no, you haven't. Mr. Lake. Yes, Mr. Lake. I heard your message over the radio. Thought I'd be listening to Amos and Andy, didn't you?
A song or two and a bit of Sennett's slapstick, they sold records and often became more popular than the main feature. The first of these Sennett shorts was in 1931. This was an eventful and crucial time for Bing Crosby.
Sweet and lovely, sweeter than the roses in May. Sweet and lovely, heaven must have sent her my way. Skies above me never were as blue as her eyes.
I think the alcoholism ended primarily because of Dixie. Shortly after they married, Dixie left. She went to Mexico and Agua Caliente and was demanding a divorce. And she didn't tell Bing she was leaving. He found out from his brother Everett and then read about it in the papers, and she was gone for a couple of weeks before he finally tracked her down and then flew out there. And she basically gave him an ultimatum. And it took.
Thanks to Dixie, Bing's career was saved. The big broadcast of 1932 gave him his first starring role in a Hollywood movie, a forgotten classic.
Every night, why do I shake with pride? Shaking 'cause dynamite. Change your mind about me, don't you tell me that you change your mind about me.
Crosby was the first singer to really understand what jazz time was, and because he became a popular figure very early, he brought those rhythms and that kind of interpretation into the mainstream where it had never been before.
Just to be with Dinah Lee.
With the success of the big broadcast of 1932, Paramount put Bing under contract for 5 years, and throughout the 30s, he made an average of 3 films a year.
Tomatoes, yeah.
But you're as cold as yesterday's mashed potatoes.
Potatoes. A fine romance. You won't nestle. A fine romance. You won't even wrestle.
Kraft Music Hall, starring Bing Crosby with Jimmy Dorsey and his orchestra.
In 1935, he took over the weekly Kraft Music Hall from Paul Whiteman and presented it for the next 11 years to an audience of up to 50 million.
Every time it rains, pennies from heaven. Don't you know each cloud contains pennies from heaven? You'll find your fortune fallen all over town. Be sure that your umbrella is upside down. Trade them for a package of sunshine and flowers. If you want the things you love, you must have showers. So when you hear it thunder, don't run under a tree. There'll be pennies from heaven for you.
A 100 miles south of Los Angeles, near San Diego, is the coast resort of Del Mar. Bing became the founder and major investor in a race course he built there to attract the Hollywood celebrities. To this day, every race meeting opens with the song he recorded for the inaugural ceremony.
Of taking the tape machine and making multi-track recordings with it. It's called Sound on Sound. And that was another world.
Somewhere there's music, I'll play the tune.
I refer throughout my book to Bing as the technological man. He is the man who, more than anyone else, represented the ultimate control of technology over American and popular entertainment throughout the world.
Oh, wouldn't I be thrilled to hear you say?
Bing's 1950 film, Mr. Music, featured an Ampex tape recorder.
Today.
Look, Katie.
His leading lady, Nancy Olson, was a young actress signed by Paramount while still at theatre school.
I think I finally got this lyric straightened out. Now take this down, huh? Have you had your breakfast?
I don't want any. He was immensely generous with me. He took his time if I flubbed, if I didn't hit my mark. It seemed to amuse him, which made it wonderfully relaxing for me. It was like, oh, there she goes again, you know. But it was with an affection and a tolerance.
A tender sigh.
Here's that lyric.
No, thanks. Did you send the flowers to the boat?
Yes.
Good. Say, how's that sound to you now?
But for all his relaxed manner and personal kindness to her, Nancy Olson became aware of a darker side to Bing.
There was a sadness that I picked up on. I was aware that what he was going home to was not any fun.
Bing and Dixie had now been married for 20 years, but as she'd persuaded Bing to control his drinking, she herself lost control. By 1950, aged 40, she was an alcoholic and seriously ill with cancer. To make matters worse, the boys were now becoming problem teenagers. Bing had been determined that they should not be specially privileged, and following his own upbringing later, he boasted, "I'll bet my boys remember the spankings they got when they were younger." But he encouraged them to follow in his footsteps, and that year helped Gary to a gold record.
Play from a copy of a tune that is choppy, you get all of my...
But Gary did indeed remember those spankings, and after Bing's death wrote about them in detail in his 1983 autobiography. The tabloids revelled in the fall of an idol. Gary's account of his father's coldness and severity was used to savage the memory of a man who'd been so widely loved.
I thought that someone had given him very bad advice to really be personal and say that, yes, this was a cold man and a cruel man. It was a time when I know what happened with people Bing's age. I know this. My grandmother would say, go out and get a switch from the tree because you have disobeyed me too many times. And I know what it was like. It was a different time. So, you know, he just made too much of it. It was not that way, and I know that it was not that way because I was there.
When Gary Giddens recently interviewed son Philip, he heard a different story.
Philip thinks of Bing as being the ideal father because he took us to the Rose Bowl, he took us to this and the studio and all of that kind of thing. But clearly he was an absentee father and he was missed. And Dixie was an alcoholic who was not up to being a full-time mother at all times, although they loved her and she was an extraordinary woman in so many ways. But they were raised to a large degree by Georgie Hardwick, a rather mean and unforgiving housekeeper who did use corporal punishment, and I think they raised themselves and didn't do a good job of it. They were very competitive, they were constantly fighting, they were always getting into trouble. They started drinking early. Philip told me that he only remembered hitting Gary, for example, once, but it was quite a blow with a golf club on his rear end.
In September 1952, Bing was filming this scene in Little Boy Lost in Paris when he heard that Dixie was now terminally ill. He got back to LA just before she died. The following year, when he met up with the young Irish fan George O'Reilly in London, he was still grieving for her.
He was still in mourning at the time, and he still had at that time it was a black diamond-shaped emblem on his sleeve. And he spoke about Dixie when I asked him, but always with Bing in my meetings and the years that followed, you could talk to him about anything if he brought up the subject, really, but you couldn't ask him too many private things or discuss private things with him because he would have his own way of wanting to put them past him, put them in the past.
I think the great paradox about Bing Crosby is that here's a performer that everybody in the world thought they knew intimately, a man who just radiated warmth. But in fact, nobody really knew him. I said to Phil Harris, everybody tells me you knew him better than anyone. And Phil, who loved Bing Crosby, adored him, said, if I knew Bing Crosby better than anyone, then nobody knew Bing Crosby.
Bing's next film was White Christmas, which capitalized on the huge success of the Irving Berlin song In Holiday Inn. He persuaded the producers to cast Rosemary Clooney. They became great friends.
When I'm worried and I can't sleep, I count my blessings instead of sheep.
We had exactly the same sense of humor. He had a kind of a, I don't know where he got it because he came from Washington State, for God's sake, but he had a kind of a Southern sense of humor. And I grew up in Kentucky, and that's he always could make me laugh.
Just Rosie and me. Frank, he makes three. We're happy in our blue heaven.
Now, starring opposite Grace Kelly in The Country Girl, Bing revealed yet another side of himself as a serious actor.
When did you get these, Frank?
Last night after you fell asleep.
He brought to that role a depth and an understanding that was really remarkable.
Considering Bing's past problems, at first the producers were nervous of offering him the role of Frank Elgin, a washed-up alcoholic actor. For Bing, it wasn't a problem.
Give me the dickie, come on.
I can tell from here, Frank, you're doing just wonderfully.
I am not, and you know it. Oh, why don't they get me a dresser, Lord? For the money they're paying me, they could afford a dozen of them.
Do you want me to talk to Cook about it?
Yes, and while you're at it, tell him to stop that understudy from snooping around backstage. I come off just now, and he's hovering there like a vulture, just waiting for me to cave in.
I'm sure if you talk to Mr. Dodd about it,
You talk to him. Tell him to keep that guy out front and get me some new tissue. That stuff is murder.
I will right after rehearsal. Frank, I'm sorry I stepped on that line of yours in the depot scene.
Well, that's all right. Think nothing of that.
Just as I was so nervous.
Nervous? What's to be nervous about? It's just another show.
Where would you ever find another star as sweet as that?
What a wonderful guy. Why didn't some very creative, enterprising director, writer immediately realize that here was a character actor that was golden? I mean, he truly, his artistry was beginning to shine.
For his performance in Country Girl, Bing was nominated for another Oscar, but the award went to Marlon Brando for On the Waterfront. Accompanying Bing to the award ceremony was a young Paramount starlet from Texas, Catherine Grandstaff. They married in 1957. Catherine, 30 years his junior, still lives in the family house he bought in 1964. She continues to work as an actress and has recently starred in San Francisco in the musical Pal Joey and sang the same role in Russia in Russian.
Bewitched, bothered and bewildered am I.
I was 19 when we met. We married when I was 23. The first thing he said to me was, "Howdy, Tex, what's your hurry?" And I was absolutely riveted to the spot. His voice absolutely could mesmerize you. He had eyes that could look right through you. He was not an overtly sexual person at all. He wasn't a Clark Gable. But every woman in the world wanted to marry him. I was just very lucky because he wanted to marry me.
Bing took second chances seriously. That's again the Jesuit education, and there was something of an Augustinian conversion in the 1950s after Dixie died, and he had this second chance with a young wife and a whole new family, 3 children, and he wasn't going to make the mistake of being an absentee father again.
Nathaniel, on the left, became US amateur golf champion. Harry trained as an actor and is now big time on Wall Street. Mary Frances became an actress, starred in Dallas and shot J.R. She now lives in the hills above Malibu, far from the frenzy of Hollywood, with her husband and Bing's latest grandchild.
You make me happy when skies are gray.
I am very proud to be his daughter. And I think that his strength and his power has gone down into his children. I think we were very lucky. I think that Dad learned a lot from the mistakes that he made with the first family, so that he was much more available to us as a father. I think, obviously, my mother was a very important dynamic to the picture. He learned from his mistakes. I think he was very unhappy with the mistakes that he had made and tried to do better on the second family, and I think he did.
Oh, give me land, lots of land, under starry skies above. Don't fence me in.
He built a home in the middle of nowhere in Baja California. We would live there for 2 months out of every year. Mother would homeschool us. It was just us. We were so spoiled to have that much of him.
Let me be by myself in the evening breeze and listen to the murmur of the cottonwood trees.
He taught me how to hunt and fish and play tennis and shoot. You know, all the things that you teach your daughter to do. He didn't know what to do with a little girl, so he treated me like a boy, which suited me fine.
Saddle my old saddle underneath the western sky. On my cayuse, let me wander over yonder till I see the mountains rise.
The career went to the back burner. I remember his son Nathaniel, the youngest one, told me, and quite seriously, that he thought of Bing as his father as primarily as a golfer. He wasn't really aware of his history as an entertainer.
Straight down the middle.
Golf did indeed become a major part of his life. The Pro-Am Celebrity Golf Tournament he had first sponsored in 1937 continues to this day to raise $1 million annually for charity.
Have you heard that poor dear Blanche, she got run down by an avalanche? Well, did you ever...
The rock and pop years of the 60s saw Bing limiting himself to recordings, occasional film appearances, and 2 or 3 television shows a year. The family joined him in his annual Christmas special.
He said, you just have to be simple and sing out and let people hear the words. And that was it. That was it for advice from Dad. But considering the source, it was listened to.
I've known success, some mild acclaim, and I must say it gave me pleasure. And I've had some stress, the scars remain, when the lady luck gave me short measure.
We're just running down the songs that we'd chosen for the album, and John Timperley, our engineer, happened to be there, and he said, "Oh, it's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Crosby. This is where we're going to record tomorrow." He said, "I'm going to put the brass over there, I'm going to put the strings over here, the reeds there, the rhythm here." He says, "And you, Mr. Crosby, will go in that vocal booth." And Bing looked at the vocal booth. No. He said, "I'm an old band singer, John. Put me with the band." And John said, "Well, really, Mr. Crosby," he says, we need to get separation for the stereo. The brass can get awfully loud." And Bing pursed his lips. He said, "Well, I'll get louder." He said, I want to be with the band." He said, "Believe me, John, if it worked 50 years ago, it'll work this time. Don't worry." And it did.
When I look back, I can't forget the friends I've known and the things they've done. I thank them all. It's been great fun. As for me, I have no doubt what life is all about. That's what life is all about.
I imagine if people like me, it's because they just figure I'm one of the fellas. I don't have any side or any great flair or anything. I just sing simply, and so that most of people think, well, they could probably sing as well themselves if they tried, and they relate to me in that way, and they like me for that reason.
In 1976, for the first time in his 50-year career, he went on tour with a stage show. When he brought his family and friends to the London Palladium, the reception was tumultuous. He returned the next year. A week after his final show in London, he had a massive heart attack after a round of golf in Spain. Bing Crosby was buried at 6 in the morning on a hillside in Hollywood, and thousands attending his memorial services in New York and London and around the world.
The man who was the greatest influence on the mass media in the 20th century was not a scientist or an inventor. He was a crooner.
I think Nathaniel quoted him best when he won the U.S. Amateur Championship. And they said, "What would your dad say?" And he said, "Don't let it go to your head, kid."
For nobody else gives me that thrill. You've got your faults, but I loved you still. It had to be you, had to be you. One